The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We are pleased and honored to connect you today with Secretary of Administration Nancy Rodriguez. Good to see you.
Good to be here, Woody. Thank you for letting us be here.
Great. I know you have two deputies here. Don Palmer, good to see you, sir. And Robin DeSocio, good to see you. We'll talk to you in a few minutes, but Madam Secretary, please give us an idea of the breadth and depth of your agency, your background, training, and experience, and how you came to be Secretary of Administration.
Well, Woody, I can tell you that I sit before you today as the face of the American dream, that I was very, very lucky coming from a background where my parents came to this country to flee a military dictatorship. And English is not my first language, so forgive me if I flub up a word or two.
It's Portuguese, as I understand
it's Portuguese
it, right?
and Brazilian, that is correct. But I've had the honor of serving as Secretary of Administration, which is the most dynamic and amazing of all the secretariats, despite what my co-secretaries will tell you. I really do have the most dynamic of all of them. I work not only with the talented Don Palmer from the State Board of Elections and C to the Administration of Justice, to Robin, who will talk a little bit about the Compensation Board and all of the constitutional officers. These two individuals are the ones that really interact on the local level. In another episode, we'll be able to talk a little bit more with the other half of the Secretary of Administration, which is the Department of General Services and the Department of Human Relations. And there you have the landlord and the buildings that we do for the Commonwealth, and then we also have the people who fill those buildings. But today I'm very honored to be here with two members of my team that really work, if you will, where the rubber meets the road, who are probably the most identifiable out there in the community. I don't think there's a sheriff, a treasurer, a general registrar, electoral board member who does not know these two faces.
Great. Well, let's talk about elections, because they have been in the news most recently in terms of two recounts for the state senate, which tipped the balance over there in that body. Talk to us about those recounts and how they were handled.
Well, thanks, Woody. The recounts really are, it's a partnership between the local registrars and the State Board of Elections. We conduct the elections, and sometimes they're close. When they're close, we want to make sure that we got the result right, and what we did and what we saw in December, January, and then into the special recount is when we looked at the numbers and we went back through it again and we very carefully looked at it, the results were not that much different, did not change the initial outcome of the race. To get to that result, it takes a lot of hard work, dedicated professionals at what they do, and that's to provide access to voters, make sure there's the integrity of the process, and that the results are confident to the citizens of the Commonwealth.
And you've got a rich background in history in terms of Department of Justice, dealing with civil rights matters, especially elections. Talk to us a little bit about your background and experience in that area.
Well, I spent a number of years at the Department of Justice enforcing the voting rights laws. That's very valuable in this position because it keeps you sensitive to some of the issues that are out there, and that's sort of things that we can do as election administrators to make that process easier and to fine-tune the process. I think that it provides that sort of sensitivity to the process, that I understand what the federal laws are intended to prohibit and what they're not. And so it just provides me that experience, and I think it helps at the state level. And then, of course, I provide that guidance to local election officials so they're more in tune of what the laws are.
And of course, you are in the process, or your agency is, of implementing a law that was passed last session by the General Assembly that now requires photo identification in order to vote. Talk to us about what citizens need to know in order to comply with that.
Well, citizens should make sure that they have an ID that's appropriate. It's going to be a photo ID, and that's really the core of it for confirmation of identity to polls. If you have a DMV ID or a license, that's going to work. If you do not, you could use a Commonwealth, an Institute of Higher Learning, which has a photo ID, or an employer ID that has a photo. If you do not have one of those IDs, we encourage you to go to the State Board of Elections website or to your general registrar and ask them for an ID. There will be free IDs, photo IDs, that will be a Commonwealth ID for voting purposes. And if you do not have one of the IDs, we are providing that ID for free, both in the office, and there'll be opportunities in the community to provide those IDs.
And I understand that if you show up to vote and you don't have a photo ID, you will still be allowed to cast a provisional ballot.
Absolutely, and there's a number of different ways to get that ID. For example, if you forget your ID, we're not here to make you go back to your home and get it. Obviously, that's a choice, but you could vote a provisional ballot, and then you can provide your ID either in person, or you actually can scan it and send it into the registrar's office, or even fax it. So there's a number of different ways that we use technology to make it easier for the voter to provide that ID after the fact.
Compensation Board, Ms. DeSocio, tell us a little bit about your duties and responsibilities and who you interact with.
Well, the Compensation Board is a very small agency in state government from an administration standpoint. We have a very small staff, but we deal with a very large budget, which is about $600 million a year that we're responsible for sending those state dollars down to local governments to support the offices and the operations of constitutional officers. And most folks don't know who constitutional officers are or what that means. Having just spoken about elections, folks will recognize when I say when they go to the ballot to vote for the governor or to vote for the president in some of the larger elections, they also see on the ballot their constitutional officers, and those are the sheriff, the Commonwealth attorney, the circuit court clerk, the treasurer, and the commissioner of the revenue. And those are all local elected officials that serve at the local government level and that are accountable to the citizens. And so while they operate at the local government level, they're not actually beholden to the Board of Supervisors or the City Council. The Compensation Board provides a significant portion of funding to support their operation, and that allows them to maintain some autonomy to actually be directly accountable to the citizens that elect them. So when folks look around and they see their sheriff's office either providing their primary law enforcement service if there's not a police department in that area, or of course they're familiar with the Commonwealth attorney. If they watch TV, they hear the term district attorney, which usually applies to other states. The circuit court clerk handles marriage licenses. They record deeds when you buy a home. They handle concealed weapons permits. Your treasurer, of course, collects all of the revenues that come into the county, and the commissioner of the revenue does the billings for real estate taxes, for personal property taxes, and they also do assist citizens with filing their state income taxes. So these are ways that citizens interact with these folks on a daily basis in their localities, and they actually elect those individuals to provide those services to them and be directly accountable to them. So the Compensation Board's role is to take this large amount of state funding to support these 650 offices statewide and provide a level of functional support for those offices so that they can maintain that autonomy from the local government while serving those citizens that elect them. And so our role as a very small administrative agency is to provide an equitable way to distribute that funding across all local governments to the degree that we're funded to do so. So that's sort of our role.
And they are called constitutional officers because they are created by the Virginia State Constitution, are they not?
That's exactly correct.
And you indicated there are 650 of these constitutional
There are 650 offices. Now that does include about 23 regional jails. One of the things that sheriff's offices are responsible for is the housing of inmates which are folks that are either awaiting trial on an arrest charge or have been sentenced for some local or state misdemeanor offense. The sheriffs are responsible for housing those, and they either do them in a local jail, which is a jail within the locality they serve, like the City of Richmond Jail, and the sheriff is responsible for that, or they participate in a regional jail, which is where you have 2 or 3 localities that form together and have a larger, more efficient operation. And so we're also responsible for funding those regional jail facilities, which are actually not operated by an elected sheriff, but by an appointed superintendent, although you have sheriffs on the boards of those jails. So we do include in that 650 these 23 regional jails. We also have a handful of finance directors. Most localities have a director of finance, but the compensation board only funds about 6 of those, and those are in local governments where the citizens have decided to have an appointed director of finance instead of a treasurer and commissioner of the revenue. So we do fund a few of those, but by and large, there are 650 locally elected offices that report to the citizens, are accountable to the citizens, and we fund those offices.
And this is a state and local funding proposition, right?
It is. There are, it varies across the state. In some of your larger, more urban jurisdictions, there is a larger share of local funding going to support those offices, and in some of your more rural jurisdictions, what we provide may be almost all that they get. But the idea of having this state funding source is to allow them to have a consistent level of services, even in your more rural jurisdictions where there may not be as much local funding available to support those services. So we provide a consistent level of services across the Commonwealth by having the state funding source.
So you and they are both watching this budget process very closely, I take it.
The budget is a big process for us. We do sometimes have pieces of legislation that we follow, but by and large, the budget is the biggest piece of the legislative process that we stay attuned to.
Great, great. And of course, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to add, Don, you also help to support the salaries of local officials as well. Do you want to?
Yeah, the State Board of Elections, that's one of our functions, is to support the general registrars through funding. I believe it's about 60% of their funding on average. We also provide support. That's really the role of the state from a logistical perspective. They actually held the elections in every jurisdiction, 133 localities. We provide sort of the guidance and sort of our state partnership with them.
Great. Talk to us about absentee voting, because I'm sure you get a lot of questions about that. States differ on that issue, and there are conditions or requirements that have to be fulfilled before I can vote absentee.
We have a little bit of a hybrid in the Commonwealth, I call it. We don't have no excuse absentee or early voting, but we do have 45 days of in-person absentee. And there's a lot of different reasons, over a dozen different reasons that you would qualify for absentee voting in person or by absentee by mail. And so those are one of the ways to vote. Obviously, we have Election Day on the Tuesdays.
Tell us how difficult it is for veterans who are overseas to ensure that they have the right to vote and that their votes are counted.
Well, what we find is when you look at the evidence is that because they're in an overseas remote location, the Postal Service just isn't as quick as it is here in the United States. In fact, sometimes we have issues with the Postal Service due to natural disasters or just general difficulties with the Postal Service funding issues. When you're overseas, those issues are magnified because you not only have to make it overseas, and then you have to go those extra miles to a military unit that's in the sand or on the ocean somewhere. So what you find is often those ballots may be delayed. And what that means, if it's not back in time, they won't be counted. So we have to take special actions to sort of help those overseas citizens and military individuals to vote. And that means under the MOVE Act, which is a federal law, it requires that if the individual requests to have that ballot transmitted electronically to them, they have the right to have that done.
Yeah, I think I've seen some legislation in the General Assembly to allow e-voting absentee for our veterans overseas.
That is something the Assembly is looking at right now because it does help to have that ballot transmitted electronically. It saves some time, but there's a lot of soldiers and sailors that still don't have their vote counted. So the Assembly is considering allowing a secure process to have that vote transmitted back electronically to make sure those ballots are counted.
Now, you mentioned the MOVE Act as a federal requirement. What other federal requirements inform and influence your ability to administer state election laws?
Well, as I talked about, my experience in the Department of Justice has helped me a lot with this. There are a slew of federal requirements that need to sort of work with the state requirements, because we have the MOVE Act, which is for the military and overseas voters. We have the Help America Vote Act, which, for example, wanted to improve our statewide database and registration system. We have the Voting Rights Act. We have the National Voter Registration Act. So you get the picture. We have a lot of federal requirements that sort of need to be worked into what we do at the state level. And, you know, a federal law, they all need to be complied with by all 50 states. And so sometimes it's a difficult situation, but that's what we get paid the big bucks.
And Madam Secretary, I know you've had a lot of experience in this area.
And that's one of the things I wanted to mention. One of the most, having served in Don's capacity, having had that honor, but one of the things that has always amazed me about Virginians is the fact that when you look at your constitutional officers, which we spend $600 million financing every year, and you look at how many people go out and vote for those particular offices. Obviously, the sheriff has an impact on your life.
Sure.
The treasurer, the commissioner of revenue, even your board of supervisors. Those are the most important. But Don can correct me if I'm wrong, in a 4-year voting cycle, presidential election, most important turnout, correct?
Absolutely.
Gubernatorial, most important. Next year is when we do the constitutional officers, lowest.
The lowest.
The lowest.
Interesting.
Yet here are the individuals that have the most impact on your daily life. Your board of supervisors will determine what your property tax will be.
Right.
Your school board will determine how many days and what snow days you will or will not make up in the city of Richmond, correct? But most importantly, they are truly the people that interact most with the citizens and have the daily impact, yet we're Virginians. I mean, and that is one thing I hope this show will do, is at least make people understand that we have an election every year in Virginia. And as Senator Warner likes to say, this is the year that's the most important. You know, and next year, last year, it was Governor McAuliffe who said that was the most important. But truly, it has a tremendous impact on your day-to-day life next year, when we will actually be determining the people that Robin will be working with. And we have been fortunate. I think Robin will agree on the high caliber of constitutional officers that we have.
Right, and there's been, I wouldn't say a lot of turnover, but there's been a lot of aging out of some of the longer serving officers, and we've had quite a number of new officers coming in, and you know, so we get to meet a lot of new faces, and you know, they've come in with new ideas about how they want to work with their constituents and how they want to provide the services, and so they have to get to know us and understand, of course, what their funding limitations are and how to work with their local governments. We see a lot of changes in local governments, and that affects their ability to perform their services. And you know, it's been very interesting. You know, we talked about that I've been with state government for a long time and worked with constitutional officers for a long time, but you know, one of the great things about the Compensation Board is, despite being such a small agency, and it seems like what we do is so simple, just sending out all of this money, is we actually have a number of different sort of ancillary functions that report all kinds of information to the General Assembly and budget decision makers and the administration. And so despite having been with the agency for a long time, there's always something new for me to learn as well. And so we really do, you know, in addition to what Nancy said about having, you know, diversity of just groups that we work with, but we also just have a lot of diversity in functions. the types of things that we do that keep us busy on a day-to-day basis.
I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned the fact that there's such diversity, and they also represent the core functions of government, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the people you work with on a daily basis, I take it.
Right, and one of the most important things that we have to remember is we are an administrative agency, and Secretary Rodriguez spoke about how interesting it is, this group of folks that she works with. We have a diverse group of folks that we work with as well, but we always try to remember that our role is to support them in an administrative function. So our primary goal is really our customer service to all of these constitutional officers, because while they do have to deal with us annually to do a budget and monthly to deal with reimbursing funds to their local governments, that's not the job that they were hired to do. That's not what they that's not what they sought when they were running for election. They want to provide the different levels and different types of services that their office is required to do and that they ran for. And so our goal really as an agency is to make sure that we're making it as easy for them as possible, and that we're there for them in an advisory capacity and in a way to assist them with this administrative function that they have to do to get those funds back to their local government, recognizing that when they ran for office, it wasn't just so they could deal with the compensation board.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I recall from your website that your agency also has a DNA sampling database to avoid duplication. Talk to us about that.
We do. We have a number of these ancillary functions, and that's one of them. There was, for a period of time, a backlog over at the Department of Forensic Science in terms of getting all of the DNA samples through, and what that results in is a backlog in the local jail of folks that are waiting to go to trial because they're waiting for the results of those DNA tests to come back. And so what this tracking database does on our website is allows folks at different levels in the criminal, or different points through the criminal justice system, to go into the system and identify whether or not a DNA sample has already been taken. So if you are arrested for certain crimes, you may have to have a DNA sample taken, and if it's not taken at arrest, then there might be another point through, as you progress through the criminal justice system, where that sample might need to be taken. And so to avoid duplication and multiple folks in the criminal justice process taking a sample and sending it to the Department of Forensic Science for analysis, they can go into our system, and if one hasn't been taken before, then they record that they're taking it, and that avoids other individuals further down the line taking that sample and sending it off and creating a backlog at Forensic Science. And so it actually did, was one of the factors that contributed to bringing down that backlog several years ago and actually reducing the local population in jails.
So this is a real critical function for law enforcement and public safety.
I think that it is. It really helps to save money in a lot of different areas and save time for folks. But we do, some of those types of things. We have a really good staff. Even though we're small, we have a really good staff that has a wide variety of skills. And so we're able to, with some of our IT staff, put systems like that into place that make things more efficient and do them quickly and at relatively low cost.
It's becoming clearer and clearer to me that your agency performs such a great function in terms of the backbone and infrastructure of state government. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I think unless you really start opening up the administration secretariat, you really do not have an appreciation, because when we do our jobs well, which obviously we do, you don't learn about us. Put it this way, if you came into this building and there was no heat, I would hear about it. Or if the constitutional officers did not get paid, I would hear about it. If you came to the polling place and you were not in the polling book, in the poll book, I would hear about it. So again, we provide, and with Sarah Wilson, if you went into DMV and there was nobody behind the counter, I would hear about it. Where is the staff? So again, our goal is to not have the citizens know we exist. We do our job behind the scenes. We provide the trains moving on time. We make sure for equitable treatment. Two things that you heard both Robin and Don talk about, the fact is that can you imagine if in her division of compensation board, if one locality got paid more or that kind of thing, or the same way with the general registrars, if there was not an integrity of the election. I mean, during my tenure at State Board, including Don's, and as far as I know, knock on wood, there has never been an election that the results were changed with a recount. So I think that speaks highly not only for the folks at SBE, but also the folks in the field who are doing this. I think what you see, and that's why I really appreciate, Woody, an opportunity to highlight the agency heads that make up the Secretariat, because they truly are the dedicated public servants out there. Again, many of my fellow secretary members might say, oh, mine is the most glamorous, mine is the most, we're out there. We are very, very happy being the backbone to state government. We want to see it. When the governor gets up in the morning, I don't want him to have to worry about when he flicks the switch in the executive mansion that the lights are going to come on, or the fact that there are going to be on snow days where we have to call an emergency to keep our employees safe. We want to be a good employer, as well as making sure that our state employees are kept safe. So to me, it's a great honor, but it's also a lot of fun to be working with these individuals.
Great. We've got a minute and a half left. I think I want to end with elections. I want to talk a little bit about technology, because a lot of questions I'm sure you get relate to the equipment that's being used now in the voting booth and how safe it is, so to speak. So talk to us about that.
Well, the equipment inside the polling places have been tested both at the federal and the state level. We have a testing regimen where we make sure that the tabulation of the ballots are accurate. Now, the Presidential Commission on Election Administration looked at the issue, and we at the State Board have been looking at the issue, and there is a need, there's a technology gap, there's an impending crisis, as they put it. And we face some of those same challenges here in the Commonwealth, where we need to start transitioning to new voting systems, new voting equipment. That's something that both the State Board of Elections and the Assembly has been looked at over the last couple of years and will continue to look at.
Great. Well, we'll leave it at that. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your public service. Good to have you all here. Secretary of Administration Nancy Rodriguez, thank you for being here. Don Palmer, thank you for being here and taking care of our elections. And the Compensation Board, Robin DeSocio, thank you.
For having us.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.